Short reading this morning. This is from Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes. Jesus began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the dominion of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." So I only want to focus on 3 of the Beatitudes today. And you may find this a little bit of a refresher, if there is such a thing as the doctrine of our path. I want to reiterate that in very simple terms. That we are questing to fulfill the pattern of truth of the soul, to live the life that we are given the opportunity to live. When most people begin the path, there's a very strong, almost obsessive identification with the mental and emotional interpretations of one's life. And we have to be compassionate about that because it's kind of how we're trained. We're kind of raised to be somewhat obsessed and identified with our thinking and various levels of obsession and identification with how we feel, mostly emotionally and not as much the deep feelings of truth. And that's a very difficult way to live. It's a very difficult way to live when your mind is a tremendous authority and you are ping-ponged around, or like a pinball, you are knocked around by this emotional state and that emotional state. And as a result of those emotions, the mind creates stories and narratives that just seem to be kind of gloomy and really painful and really difficult. You can imagine from God's perspective feeling tremendous sorrow. Think about it like this. You know, sometimes kids get attached to certain clothes or certain shoes or whatever, and yet they outgrow them. But it can be very painful to let go of a particular piece of clothing or a particular pair of shoes because it identifies them so much. And we as parents of the kids have to go, well, those don't fit anymore and we'll get you a new pair, but they want the old pair. Or they want to continue wearing certain clothes. And at some point, it's like you put it on and it just doesn't look right anymore, it doesn't fit right anymore. This idea of living by the mind and by the emotions, at some point, if you really decide to walk the path, you'll see that it doesn't fit anymore. It's not spacious enough. It's too constricting. With clothing, it's very obvious. You know, it doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right anymore. But the mind and the emotions, because of the intensity of how they exert themselves upon us, they can stick around for a long time. In fact, you can live your whole life in these patterns and these methods that are not spacious. For us who come here, we know there's more. And Jesus begins the Beatitudes with blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the dominion of heaven. I suspect the language, by the time it was translated from Aramaic and maybe to Greek and maybe to English, and who knows what it went through, that maybe poor in spirit is a little bit of a rough translation. But in meditating upon it, if you think about when you are poor in something, you have a need. To have a spiritual need means I need guidance, I need direction, I need help. And if we turn to our minds and our emotions for that help, then we miss out on this dominion of heaven. That the pattern of a human being is set up whereby we can develop the connection to receive that which gushes forth for the Spirit, the overwhelming riches of what might be called sometimes the living water or the bread of life. That which feeds your spirit. I was reading something while I was away about self-hypnosis and hypnosis and just the idea of how to reprogram the subconscious. And one of the things that the the author talked about was how we as people, we don't trust our own perspective. We're seeking somebody of authority to validate what we do and say. Is this right? Should I do this? There must be an element of the human being that's how we're created. We're created to seek the validation of something higher. It's just our society hasn't completely figured out yet that there is a great presence within which represents that. That's the source that we want to go to. I think that can feel disappointing a little bit. First of all, because you have to work to get it. You have to work to develop that connection. And segueing into the next beatitude, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There's so many different ways that you can interpret that. But one of the things I would like you to recognize is that there is an aspect of seeking that within which can feel disappointing because so many of us are longing to be taken care of, to be comforted by those who should have done it in the first place. Whether that were mostly it starts off with parents or siblings or in our family of origin, most of the people who really get into this path do so because we have a need. We have a need for love that was never really provided. And so there's a mourning period when you go, oh, it's actually this presence within and not the people who I think should have done it and should still do it. So that's one way to consider that you're not going to get the comfort from the people that you really want to get it from. And that can also translate to the relationships that you have now. Desire for comfort and understanding from people, and it doesn't quite yield that which you are hoping for. So then that takes us to the third beatitude. Blessed are those who thirst and hunger for righteousness, for they will be filled. So it's a beautiful linear path, really, where you go, I have a need for something higher to guide my life. I don't really know how to live. There's this great joke that comedian Brian Regan, he's really funny. He's very clean, which is what I like about him. And he was talking about how he went shopping for groceries one time, and his friend says, well, Brian, you know, you should never go shopping for groceries when you're hungry, because you might end up buying the food you want to eat when you're hungry. And he's like, I don't know how to function. You know, meaning, that doesn't make any sense. If you've heard that saying before, the reason it makes sense is because you end up buying a lot of food that you just want to eat right then and there. But the way he tells it, it's just really hysterical, because the punchline is, I don't know how to function. As though I can't go to the grocery store when I'm hungry because I might not buy the right things. I think that's funny. There is a truth to the fact that we don't know how to function, really. We're trying to figure it out. And the messages that we're getting from society are not great. The messages that we're getting from the celebrities, from the athletes, from the people who appear to be doing really well, are not good for the spirit most of the time. There might be some people who persevere, who really want to achieve something, who really want to fulfill a certain potential. I think that's cool. I like that. But thirsting and hungering for, is that a word? For righteousness, to really want to do what is right, with a capital R. I often teach in the meditation classes because people are meditating, and we're teaching them to meditate, to examine the processes of how they experience life. And people hit walls when they're like, yeah, but that was wrong and this is right, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to just clench my fist until the world acknowledges that I'm right and they're wrong. And I go, that's not the path. The path of love is forgiveness and compassion and understanding and acceptance. Even though I get it, that person is technically not right. They said they were going to do this and they're not doing it. They said it was all my fault, but in reality it's a mixture. They said they were going to fulfill this commitment, and then now they've walked away. So we go, yeah, they broke their promise. They don't have the sight yet to take full responsibility. They are attached to some sort of lie out of pride, whatever it is. We go, I get it. But there is a righteousness that we do seek and that we hunger for, which is to fulfill the pattern of myself as a being given the graceful vehicle of a body, with the ability to communicate, with the ability to see, with the ability to serve. And the promise is, you will be filled. If you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you will be filled. Day to day, there can be challenging moments. One of the things that I learned as I was being trained in the ministry was, when the next step is ready for you to ascend to, you have to almost completely discard the previous step that you were on and fully embrace the next step. And when you fully embrace the step that you move to, you go, oh, I see, this is so much different, this is so much more spacious, this makes more sense. But then later, when the next step appears, you have to look at that step and go, I totally discard that. That's hard. That's hard to do, because we go, but when I got to that step, I was so enlightened, I was so inspired. It made so much sense. Yeah, there's something about, remember the kids, they love their shoes, and then all of a sudden the shoes are 2 sizes too small, and they have to go, I can't wear them anymore. They don't fit. So, what I would like you to do is have a deep desire and craving to know what it means to be right in accord with God. And in order to do so, you have to go through the battles that lie before, in order that the mental and emotional would maintain their place on a practical level. I use my mind for things that my mind is good at. I don't use my mind to decide the course of my life. I use my mind to negotiate various stages of life, because the mind is really good at seeing a bunch of things and kind of calculating them and analyzing and reasoning through difficult situations. But the mind is not the source of inspiration. And there will be times where life is really painful. And we can't see how this is going to help us. Or we're really frustrated, or really angry, or we're depressed, or we're lonely. I mean, those are feelings that the emotional side is sending messages, and we're trying to remedy ourselves. We're trying to medicate away from those. And yet, the solution is contained in the second one. We got to mourn the things that we lose, and we will be comforted. Ultimately, what you have to mourn is probably the loss of the life that you've been pursuing up until this point. And that continues to happen in a way. As you grow on the path, what you thought your life was going to be, it's sort of like there's a constant sense of like, oh, it's actually going to be this. Oh, it's going to be that. They say the one constant is change. Things are going to change. So we have to mourn the loss of the things that we became very enamored and we felt love for, and allow them to fall away so that something new and higher would take its place. Maybe that's why, we don't have a lot of people coming to service. It's not for everybody, I understand. But if you're one of those people who has that deep hunger and thirst for truth, and the deep hunger and thirst for love as God intends it, and ultimately for the realization of the truth of your being, then these Beatitudes give you the strength and they give you the direction of how you're going to get there. Parents are flawed human beings. Most of them probably had us without really understanding the responsibility they were taking on, without having hardly done any self-work. And we step into their environments and we become subjected to their beliefs and their ideas, and we get hurt and we get bruised and we compensate. And there'll be a point where you're just like, oh, I get it. They're just human beings that, did they do the best they could? I don't know. But they did what they did, and our job is to kind of graduate out of that soup and into a clearer broth. The murky, kind of soupy thing of the family is not going to yield much more than it has yielded up to this point. Ultimately, you want to be in the living water. You want to be in that clear, beautiful, quenching energy of God through the inner Christ.